Welcome back to the Fishing for a Reason podcast. We're going to talk about my most favorite species to target, Chinook salmon in the San Juan Islands. So let's dive right into it. My name is Jamie Props. I'm the founder and creator of Anglers Unlimited, where we help people catch more fish and have more fun, specifically in the San Juan Islands. But a lot of the tips and tools and strategies work in many different areas in the Puget Sound. So with that, we're going to dive right in. If you've never actually fished for salmon in the San Juan Islands, you'll probably pick something up in here that might help you. Or if you went out for the opener and got completely skunked, like not even a bite, you're probably going to pick something up in here that might help you a little bit as well. So just for context, salmon fishing is my one true love when it comes to fishing. I love targeting all species. It's a great time. There's always something nuanced and really beautiful about learning the behavior, the ecology, the different strategies that you can use to catch fish. But salmon is how I would call it my gateway fish. I caught my first salmon out in the San Juan Islands. And if you want to hear that story, you can hear it in the welcome episode. In episode 1, I caught my first fish and it completely ruined me, to be honest. I went from, hey, maybe this fishing thing could be kind of fun, to, oh my goodness, holy moly, this just changed my life and I'm a complete beast. I just want to do this thing all the time. How do I learn more? Where do I go? Do all the things, learn all the things, and experience that thrill again. And I think what makes salmon fishing so magical is it's not guaranteed. You are going to get skunked. I don't care how many decades you've spent out on the water. There are times the water will humble you. And I think that's what makes fishing so beautiful. It's why it's called fishing and not catching, because you're not guaranteed to catch. And there's so many different elements, especially in the San Juan Islands where we have wicked tides and currents. There's so many different dynamics to learn about the actual area and the actual fish and all the different gear to use, like so many variables, so many dynamics. So when you actually put the right combination or the right recipe, for an analogy, together, and it comes out so perfect that a fish cannot resist it, and then you actually land the thing without knocking it off with the net or something silly like that, it's just such an incredible feeling. And I really want all anglers, whether you've never done it before or you're seasoned, to have that experience. I always say the only thing more fun than catching fish is watching somebody new catch their first fish. So with that, we're going to talk about 10 specific tips that you can use to have more success, whether you're brand new to salmon fishing or you've done this a few times and you just want to have a little bit more consistent full fish boxes. So number 1, set yourself up for success before you ever leave the dock. And I can be a testimonial of how important this is, because I was the girl who had a lot on her plate, both with work, life, commitments, all the things. And so what ended up happening is, yes, I was so excited for the weekend to come, but I didn't spend that quality time to really get myself properly prepared. So when we're underway, I'm kind of tying things up and, trying to get things all organized, and oh crap, I forgot that. It was a little bit chaotic. And because of that, I had less success when I first started fishing. And so one of the key elements that you're going to see when you see other anglers and you learn from other anglers is they all have a very specific process they follow. And every process is a little bit different because it's tailored to that person. But one theme that they all have in common is setting themselves up for success before they ever leave the dock. And that means having all the gear nice and organized and tied, and everything's nice and fresh and ready, so that when you get to the fishing spot that you intend to start at, you are ready to get the gear in the water as fast as possible. So maximizing that line time is the key to your salmon fishing success. So number 1, get yourself set up for success before ever leaving the dock. Make sure you have your rod and reel ready, and make sure your line doesn't have any crazy little nicks into it. Make sure you've even picked out what you're going to put in the water first, and have that out of your tackle box and set aside. That's another really great tip. So that's one thing that we do when we go out. Like, we know what our first rig is that's going to go into the water, and we've got it ready for us. Tip number 2 is to plan the perfect trip. And what I mean by that is know the tides and currents. So many people come out here and they just think, oh, I'll just pick a random spot in the water, drop stuff in there, and it's going to be great. This body of water here can act very much like a river in some spaces. And so fish will behave accordingly by going into some little eddy spots or along the rift. Like there's all these different things that happen in the water in the San Juan Islands that's going to change the behavior of the fish. So understanding, okay, what is the tide doing? Is it going in or coming out? Is it flooding or ebbing? And if you are new to fishing, flooding means the tide's coming in, ebbing means the tide is going out. So is it flooding or ebbing? You need to know that because certain spots in the San Juan Islands are more effective to fish on an ebb, more effective to fish on a flood, and some are good for both. So understanding that first of, okay, I'm leaving at this time in the morning because that's when it makes sense for my family. Now that I'm leaving at this time in the morning, is it ebbing or is it flooding? Once you know that answer, it pretty much eliminates a whole bunch of different spots. Okay, now number 2, what's the current doing? So the tide comes in and out and fluctuates. The current is actually the speed at which the water is traveling, which also is massively important to where you're going to fish. There's certain spots that it's going like 5-6 knots and you're not going to be able to fish effectively in that kind of current. And so understanding what the current's doing so you can maximize your line time for the window of time that you have, especially when we have very short seasons. You want a slower current. The slower that you can find current, the more effective you're going to be able to troll, and you're probably going to find the fish more stacked up in that area. So number 2, set yourself up for success by understanding the tides and currents. And if this is something that you want to go deeper on, I could probably do a whole podcast episode just on current and like where to fish and how to understand tides. So if that is something that you guys are interested in learning more about, this is also on YouTube. Feel free to comment below, ask questions, or make sure that you message us online. We're on all the social media channels. Facebook is probably our most active. We also have a Facebook group, Anglers Unlimited Fishing Community. That's a great community to get some insights. And we actually talk about these topics in a little bit more depth. Okay, number 3, use your instruments and trust what the water is telling you. So we all have these really incredible electronics on our boats. And there's a couple things to note here. If you don't have them dialed in correctly, they're not going to show the returns of the fish that you may be missing, essentially. So how it works is when there's a swim bladder, and I'm going to totally butcher this because I am not a technical person at all. When we run our fishing classes, we have an incredible gentleman, Steve Chamberlain. He comes in and teaches us all this, and I learn something every time because it's like way over my head. I'll just be honest. I'm not smart enough with this stuff, but I do know, based on what Steve has taught me, that the swim bladder inside of the fish is actually, it's filled with air, and that is what's actually going to send the return back up to your screen on your electronics. So if you don't have that adjusted properly, you're going to be missing fish. So if you're out there and your screen is just not showing anything, no matter where you are, I would highly recommend to hop into our quick free Facebook group. Steve's got a training in there. Even just say, Jamie, where's the training? I'd be happy. In fact, I'll link it in the show notes. I'll link that training in the show notes so you guys can hop in and check it out. But it'll give you all the basics that you need to know to actually get set up for success. So get your instruments dialed in. And then once they are dialed in and you know they're working properly, trust them. When you're at Slime Rock off of Blakely Island and you don't see anything, like no bait, no marks, nothing, and you've been trolling back and forth, you've been spending some time on that water trying to flush it out, and you're not seeing any bird activity, trust it. And that's a good time to say, all right, it's time to move. I'm not getting anything here. And I am going to relocate and find out where the fish are. Because once you find them, you're going to see those marks all over the place. And then it's your job to use everything else on the boat that you have to actually entice that strike. So tip number 4, tackle talk. Let's talk about what bait and lure to use. This is always a favorite topic of everybody's of, oh, what should we use, right? My favorite saying is whatever you fish the most with is probably what you're going to catch the most fish on. Because we all have our favorites. Let's be real. And everyone who has a favorite is going to say, this is the thing. So let's start with the top. Bait or hardware? I would say the majority of people in the summer are fishing hardware. Reason being is it's easy. You can have a lot of confidence that it's going to perform properly, and it's fast. Bait does take a little bit more finesse to learn how to properly rig it, make sure it's spinning properly. And then also you need to check it a little bit more frequently because bellies will blow out, something might bite it and you might miss the tug on the rod. There's a lot of things that can happen that will make your bait like not fishing for you. And I always call that fishing, you're fishing a blank. It sucks to have two rods in the water and one is not even fishing because something happened and you missed it. So those are the two things to consider. If you're like, I just want it to be easy and I need to learn all the other dynamics, just start with hardware. That'll get you going. If you're like me and you want to overcomplicate everything because it's fun, fish bait. So I love fishing bait. It's my preferred method of fishing. And for those of you that are listening, I'll describe this the best I can. I brought a rig that's old just to kind of show you guys. We also have this on the YouTube channel, which will be linked in the show notes for you so you can get a visual. But what I like to do, I have not mastered cut plug herring. I have a gentleman that teaches us that because he's amazing at it. And, you know, it's really fun to kind of find your thing that you freaking love about this fishery. And mine is bait. I love fishing bait, but I was taught this by a mentor of mine, Jerry Thomas, shout out. So this is a JDF hood. It's made in Canada and they have a very specific bend. You can see it. It's kind of curved a little bit. The one I'm holding up for those of you listening is pink, but then there's a little pin. So you shove the bait inside of here using this wire. Now it does not come with the wire, which is half the fun. This is locking wire that I purchased at one of our local sporting goods stores. So it's like locking wire for a crab pot and it's pretty pliable. So you can see here it moves and bends really, really easily. And so what I did was just take a lighter and I lit the end and kind of bent it so it fit itself on top of that JDF hood. And then I use this wire inside of my herring. So I like really small herring. Orange label is my preferred. And I will just slide that inside of the gill, right inside the gill along the backbone, and then bend that fish just a little bit. You don't want it too bent because then it kind of creates this weird wobbly look. You want it to spin like a bullet. When it spins like a tight bullet, you know you've got it nailed. And then you just take the front hook and you put it into the back of the fish. So it's like this. And the tail hook is, like it says, trailing right by the tail. So that's what I use. I also like Seagar fluorocarbon leader. That stuff holds up really, really well. As far as leader length, what I do is just stretch my arms out. It's like, that's perfect. And then these little owner barrel swivels, bead chains. These owner bead chains are excellent. They'll last you multiple seasons if you take care of them. And they're a little more expensive, but to me, like, you get what you pay for. We all know that. So I love fishing bait just because once a fish actually hits, it pops it out of the clip and I'm not feeling that flasher. So one of the downsides of hardware, most guys fish hardware behind a flasher. And if you have any questions about what this all means, feel free to send me a message on Facebook and I can do a podcast or another video about what these terms actually are. So many people know this terminology, but sometimes, like, I've been in the industry so long, you forget what you don't know. So again, if you have questions related to anything that I'm sharing, please ask and we'll create the content for you around that. But like I was saying, so if you have hardware behind the flasher, as soon as that fish hits, you feel the flasher also. Even with a big fish, some guys will say, oh, when the fish is so big, you don't even feel the flash. I disagree with that. The flasher does create resistance in the water. That's how it acts. That's how it performs and actually creates the action that attracts fish to it. So I like fishing bait because there is no resistance in the water. That being said, if you are brand new, start with hardware. Just get used to all the different dynamics on the boat of sending the downrigger down and trolling before you transition into bait. There are guys that say you shouldn't play with bait for a long time. I firmly disagree. If you fish 4 times and you got this thing figured out and you want to play with bait, play with bait. It's a blast. It's an absolute blast. I started out on bait very quickly. So don't be afraid of it. Just make sure if you do fish bait, you check it. That was a long time on number 4. Tip number 5, don't chase boats, chase fish. There's so many people that go out and they had a plan based on the tides and currents. They're pretty confident in their plan and their spot. Maybe some fishing reports for why they were going to go somewhere. And then they see a whole bunch of boats at a different spot and they change their plan. Don't do that. I can't tell you how many times we've done that. We've made that same mistake. Everybody does it. They're very naturally, you're like, oh, what are we missing out on? Right. But you're better off sticking to your initial plan because there's so many times that we have made the change and that area didn't produce. It was just a whole bunch of other boats chasing other boats versus going to what we knew would be a good productive area or a decision that we had made and it produced. That being said, if you do get to your initial spot and you're like, all right, I'm not seeing anything on the sonar, I really haven't seen any nets fly, and I'm talking for at least an hour, spending some time really checking that water in that area, then we will see if there's any area we need to go to that's different. We usually have a backup plan or two based on our local knowledge, but also if we're hearing reports on the radio, because there's guys that'll tell you all about what's going on out there, we will go to that area and check it out. Sometimes those reports can be great too, because it is just more eyeballs on the water. Tip number 6, remember your intention. It's fishing, not catching. So oftentimes it will be slow out on the water. And there's people that get very uptight about that. And it just takes away from the whole experience. You're not necessarily going to catch a fish every single time, and that's okay. Why are you actually out there? And I guarantee it's something beyond catching that fish. That's the thing we're all chasing. But just look around you. Look at these islands. Look at the wildlife. Appreciate those moments that you're having with the person that you love on the boat. That quality time is so priceless when we're not strapped to our cell phones. And we all can relate to this. So I would just say when fishing gets slow and you get frustrated, remember why you're out there. Remember your intention and try to lean into the beauty of everything that's happening. Because oftentimes, once you forget about fishing, you catch a fish. Or if you start working on the boat, it never fails. All right, number 7, don't leave fish to find fish. If you see somebody else catching fish, if a net is flying, then there's fish in the area. They don't swim solo. So if you maybe caught a fish and it's small or whatever, if you've had some sort of activity, don't leave the fish to find fish. Stick and stay and make it pay, which is tip number 8. So knowing that there's fish in the area, you're better off fishing through that prime time. I can't tell you how many times people will pick up and run every 15 minutes just because they're not getting that immediate gratification of catching a fish. And you're actually wasting time and fuel. The more that you can have your line in the water and actively fishing, the more likely you're going to have success on the water. So tip number 7, don't leave fish to find fish, and stick and stay to make it pay is a common term that Tom Nelson used to use. If you've listened to the 710 ESPN radio show, The Outdoor Line, Tom Nelson talks a lot about different fisheries in different areas. So I highly recommend tuning into that show as well. It's a great one to kind of get inspired for different fisheries and get some real-time reports of what's been going on. Tip number 9, learn from locals. So you're going to see some charter boats out there. Those are guys to pay attention to. Let's say you're in a brand new area, you're out at Eagle Bluff, and you're not quite sure how to troll it. You just know that that's where somebody told you to go. Watch guys that have a very specific trolling pattern, and you can kind of get an understanding of how to follow those contours and put your gear in the right spots to grab those fish. Also ask around. People are so happy to share and help. Don't do it over the radio. That's not necessarily the best place to ask for advice just from experience. But if you're at a local tackle shop, or maybe you head over to Blakely Island to grab a beverage and an ice cream cone, if you see somebody with a bunch of fishing rods on their boat, ask them questions, ask how it's been going and where they were fishing. People are so happy to share. It's just sometimes a little intimidating if you are newer to fishing to ask. So highly recommend. And if you are one of those seasoned anglers and you're listening to this podcast, make sure to share, pay it forward. It pays back in dividends when someone can have that experience that you've been so lucky to have decades and decades of learning. And I'm a product of that. My fishing mentor was so gracious in telling me everything that I needed to know or where to go on what tides. And because of all of that knowledge, I was able to create success, and it completely transformed my life in ways that I can't even explain. So pay it forward is my other tip for you guys as well. And finally, number 10, check the regs, and then recheck the regs just in case. Our regulations out in the San Juan Islands and Marine Area 7 are really, really complicated. And it's just important to make sure that you understand how big your fish should be. So understanding 22 inches is the minimum size of a fish that you keep. Also, understand what's open. So, as an example, the opener we just experienced was you could keep 2 salmon, 1 hatchery Chinook, and then release a wild fish. And I want to just highlight, what does that mean, wild? So if you look at a fish's back, there's the fish and there's the little fin, the big fin, and then right by the tail, there's a little tiny fin. That's called the adipose fin. And what they do is they actually clip that off in the hatcheries, and that's how you can understand whether a fish is wild or whether a fish is a hatchery raised fish. And so you want to make sure that you are within those regulations. Another great thing to do is subscribe to WDFW's email list. And I'll make sure to list that in the show notes, because you're going to get information if there's emergency closures in real time. That email goes out immediately, and then you know it's real. Also, you can find out when there's emergency openers. Like, we're waiting for another potential opener here in the San Juan Islands, and make sure that you are in compliance. Also, it's a great idea to download the Fish Washington app and check on the website. And again, all of this will be linked in the show notes for you. Always make sure you're fishing legally and ethically. It's just part of what we can do to sustain this fishery for generations to come and continue to have a great time. So with that, go out there, catch some fish, and keep an eye out for that email that we're hoping to see that opens it up again for next week. And if you want to know more about any of these topics in another future episode, please shoot me a DM on Facebook and Instagram, and we will get that created for you. Happy fishing.